Hey everybody, welcome back to the next installment of Dialing In, this time HX Stomp edition. Dawned on me, I haven't done anything for the HX Stomp recently, partly because with 2.8, we can kind of swap presets between Helix to HX Stomp if they're compatible. We don't need an HX Stomp version per se, if they fit all the criteria, less than 6 blocks, and obviously within the proper amount of DSP and split paths and on and on and on. But I do want to still do some Stomp material. One thing I've been asked about a lot, one thing that's been very popular over the last couple of years is when I put together a template for the Helix that I follow with my little compressor at the end and EQ and so on and so forth. And a lot of folks have told me, contacted me and told me that they use that all the time to build their presets. And I've had a lot of questions about if I have a template that I use for the Stomp. And at first I was like, well, Stomp's obviously much more limited. What an amazing box. I use it almost always for live performance. I just love it. It gives me everything I need. I don't really use massively complex presets. So even the confines of what the Stomp offers is plenty for me to get the tones that I want. So I thought, well, it's so limited that maybe it's not really worth doing a template for, but I thought, enough people had asked for it. So I thought I'm going to do a video just showing how I would create a template that I would probably use for most of my Stomp creations, preset creations. Now, it doesn't mean this is carved in stone. Obviously, people can change it to whatever they want. But if some folks wanted to just download this and use this, I'll show you kind of how I create it and how I would go about using this to make some tones. Okay, so let's dive over to HX Edit. And take a look at what we have. So I have my blank path here. As we can tell, it's not on the Helix because we only have the one path. So what would I do? Well, for folks who have watched my, my videos in the past, they know that there's a few sort of staples to my sound that I follow, and that is one of the things is having a compressor at the end of all my presets. So I'm going to start there. Some folks have asked me, would you, with the limitation of the Stomp only having 6 blocks, would the compressor be something that you let go? And my answer is no. That's one of my favorite things to do. And a lot of folks, even they haven't watched some of my older videos and they say, why do you put that there? Or why the heck is that always at the end? Don't we put compressors first? Why are you putting a compressor after reverb and delay? And I've explained that before. I view it kind of as a mastering situation or section, right? Whereas in a studio, there's no hard and fast way to do anything, but a lot of times what happens, if a guitar player comes in, he has his pedal boards set up and the amp gets mic'd and that gets printed to tape or hard disk or however it's recorded, oftentimes in the mix, an engineer will very likely add some sort of compression. So that also ends up on the reverb and the delay and whatnot. That's never very heavy-handed compression, and that's the thing to keep in mind in this scenario as well. I'm never really slamming and squashing the sound. I use the LA Studio Comp with just a little bit of subtle compression to add some glue to the sound, and that's fine. And then the other thing is I don't use a lot of overt reverbs and delays where they're huge. Right, so the compressor is probably not going to play around too much with those when they're very subtle and just under the surface. So the answer to the short answer is yes, I still would put that. So let's start there. Let's make a stereo preset. Obviously, you guys could copy this and do a mono version if you wanted, but I'm going to throw the LA Studio Comp. And just instinctively, what I do is I end up starting with 5 on peak reduction, 5 on gain. Sometimes this could go as high as 6. Sometimes it'll go down to 4, depending on what I want, but I'll leave it at 5. I keep the mix at 100%, but that's another way. If you find that there's too much compression there, you could always pull this back to 75%, even 50% to let some of the unprocessed, uncompressed dry signal blend in, kind of what they call a New York style compression. I've used that in the past as well, and it's a nice way to get a balance. So that's up to everybody to tweak this after, but that's the one thing I definitely would put on my preset. Now, the one thing I would let go of is I usually have a parametric EQ in which I use the low and high cuts, right? I'm going to use those on the cab block. Now, I know that the cab blocks high and low cuts aren't quite as extreme, so we may set them a little bit different. But in the interest of saving a block, I'm going to leave out that EQ. But the one EQ I am going to put in, and I'll make this a stereo as well, is the low and high shelf, which is kind of a replacement for the split crossover technique that I came up with a while back. And this is a really, really handy tool to have. And again, part of this whole mastering section, I wouldn't go without this for my own personal use. So what I would probably do, and again, these settings are just starting points. I would set the high frequency at 2 kilohertz and probably boost that maybe as a start 2 dB, 3 dB, depending on what I'm doing. If I use an SM57 on the cabinet, maybe that's gonna be a little less. If I use a Royer 121 ribbon mic or any ribbon mic, that might be a little bit more. So these are just starting points. Nothing's carved in stone here. And for the low frequency, like on my other template, I'll likely go to around 650 hertz and maybe just yank that back by 2 dB. And that's just a good starting point. I'll demonstrate how this sounds in just a moment. Next thing I would do is I would also have a reverb. And again, this is gonna be up to everybody, but I always like to just start with the legacy room verb. Mostly because I'm not necessarily going for this, like I said, overt reverb sound. I'm just trying to get it so that since we're recording direct, to give it some sort of level of ambience as if it was a microphone recording in a room, picking up some of the room ambience. Even if it's a small room, you still get something on that microphone to give it a little bit of life, right? And again, yeah, we could use the early reflections in the cab block, but as I've said before, it's not my go-to way to do it, although it's perfectly valid if you like the sound of it, right? But I usually go here, I usually keep the decay, 4.5 is fine. I usually bring that mix back to 30 and that can be 30% and that can be adjusted to taste. I'm a big fan of some subtle delay, so I always, as part of my template, want to add in some sort of delay. I'm a big fan of the transistor tape. I really like that. I always set my my note sync to or my time to be set to note sync, okay? So that I can go up here and I could put in a tempo or tap a tempo in, right? If I want 120 now, it's gonna repeat as quarter notes. Again, this is gonna be very much up to personal preference. This may need to be changed to dotted eighths for certain situations or whatever else. As far as feedback goes, I'm always a fan of something in 20 to 25-ish, you know, again, personal preference. I like to keep that scale on the stereo up to 100%. The wow and flutter, again, maybe I don't know, I'll pull that back a bit. That's just gonna be personal preference again. But my mix, I always kind of like that down around 20 to 25% again. So I'll leave it there for now. Let's turn the trails on this in case we're switching things around a bit and we want those to, the tails on those reverb delays to keep going. So that would be kind of my meat and potatoes, what I would have on almost all of my kind of generic presets, things that I want to use that I'm going to use. And from there, we can add an amp and a cab in. Now, I'm obviously in the template not going to put any specific amp, but let's just pick one to put in there. And obviously I'm not going to use a separate amp and cab blocks like I would a lot of times in the Helix, because I'm going to eat up another block that way. So I'll pick an amp and cab, and I don't know, let's just grab a Placator Dirty, how's that? And that comes with the 412 Cali V30, not my favorite cab. Let's just go to a 412 Greenback 25. Just because that's what I like. Everybody's going to do whatever they're going to do on this. Nice thing is, as of the 2.8 update, Line 6 has kind of baked in the low and high cuts settings to default to 8 kilohertz on the high cut and 80 hertz on the low cut. I like those settings. So the nice thing is now when we pull our amp and cab up, we don't need to worry about that. It's going to be done for us. Now we may want to adjust that to taste later on, but that's fine. I'm going to just come up here and go put a 160 ribbon on that and pull it back like 3 inches. Okay, these are kind of default things that I might start with. I'm not going to touch anything here. I'll just leave the stock sort of settings that come up. Why don't we listen to what this sounds like without my template settings first, okay? And then we'll add in the blocks of the template to sort of see what they do to the sound. All right, so let's give that a try. Let me grab a guitar. Okay, so here we are set up with the Yamaha SA2200 guitar, one of my favorite instruments that I have. I love this guitar, it's so nice. So let's turn off all the template settings and just go with the Placator Dirty. I changed it to a 412 Greenback 25. Like I mentioned, I put a 160 ribbon 3 inches back with the default low cut and high cut settings. Didn't touch the amp settings at all. So with the compressor, the low and high shelf, verb, and delay off, all the template settings off, it would sound like this. with that sound, but let's add in the compressor at the end, see what that does. Do you hear the little glue-ish kind of thing it does? Again, with it off. Nothing wrong with that, but I really like what that little glue adds to it. It obviously, it's boosting the volume up a bit, but there's just something else, there's a squishiness to it that I really love on all my presets. Let's see what bringing the high and low shelf EQ in, bringing that in does. That's without. We bring that in on these subtle changes. All right, bring that reverb in with those settings that I start as default. Okay, and then the delay, which isn't going to be on obviously all the time, but if it is, this is what that sounds like with those default settings that I kind of instinctively go to. If you know, it's very subtle, but I find those settings work really nice in a mix, whether live or when we're recording. They just help it sit. They're not going to be overt. You know, a lot of people, I hate to say it, kind of set delay to almost hide behind it and hide things in their playing. And I don't like delay to be like that. I like delay to just be more of a bit of a sweetener, a color and ambience effect. So it's not walking all over my notes. And you know, I know some people will say, well, use a duck delay and add more. And that's possible too, but sometimes the ducking I'm not even that crazy about. There's kind of a funny sound to that sometimes. But I really like this setting here. But again, personal preference. Everybody can kind of raise and lower this to whatever they need, right? So that's basically it. Again, if we turn all of those off, here's our tone. Turn them all back on. You know what happens if we just pull up another amp model? Let's go amp and cab model. I don't know, something different. Let's go Matchstick Channel 2. All right, let's just default settings. Let's turn off everything. Here's the tone that happens. You know, some people might say a little bit dark, maybe a little bit muddy. Let's add everything in from our template. Kind of like an instant betterizer, if that's a word. And again, obviously that's going to be open to opinion, but I like the sound and I like what that template kind of does to it. Kind of takes a little bit of the mud out, opens up the high end a bit, makes it cut a little bit more, adds a little bit of ambience. How about that matchstick model? Really nice stuff. So that's the difference between what, you know, it sounds like without those template settings and what it sounds like with it. You can decide whether it's something you like. And obviously this is open to being tweaked by the end user. Obviously, I get it. Not everybody's going to like the same thing I like. Not everybody's going to have the same needs that I have. So it's a starting point. Obviously much more limited than the Helix, but I thought it might be something that would interest some folks, as I've been asked a lot of times. So I'm gonna throw this up on CustomTone without the amp block, so it's gonna sound ridiculous on its own. So you'll add your own amp and cab block and then adjust the taste, but hopefully it's enough to get somebody going and answer some of the questions, just sort of reiterate why the compressor's at the end and why I kind of do things. So I hope you guys enjoyed that video. Thank you so much for tuning in. Please like it and share it if you don't mind. And subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. I'll have a lot more content coming up real soon. And as always, thank you guys so much for the support and thank you for tuning in. And we will talk very soon. Ciao for now.